Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Rose. I'm the Exhibition and Programming Associate at the Wende. And thanks so much for tuning into our virtual interview series, Cold War Spaces. I'd like to welcome our guest today, Jan Wolf Mohnhaupt, who will be speaking about Animal Space, the Cold War of Berlin Zoos. He's an author and journalist who's written for many of Germany's leading newspapers and magazines, including Spiegel Online, Zeit Online, and PM History. The Zookeepers War was published in 2017 and has been translated into numerous languages, including English in 2020. And he's also the author of Animals Under National Socialism, published in German last year. And he's joining us from Magdeburg in Germany. Today's program will be about a 30-minute discussion between Jan and Joes Segal, the Wende's Chief Curator and Director of Programming. And after that, we leave about 15 minutes for audience Q&A, so get your questions ready to put in the Q&A box during that time. And as always, we appreciate everyone's questions, but please keep them short and concise, no longer than a sentence or two. And for other discussion among the audience, you can use the chat box. And as we're getting started, please say hi if you'd like and what city you're tuning in from. We'll be posting the recording of this program on our Vimeo page and also in podcast format on our SoundCloud. And lastly, I want to thank Susan Horwitz and Rick Feldman for generously supporting discussion series at the Wende and our virtual programs. And now I will hand it off to you to begin this interview. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna Rose. And Jan, welcome to Cold War Spaces. Great to have you.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. I'm glad to be here with you.
Perfect. And you have a very fitting background image. You're a rhinoceros. Great to see that. So I would actually like to start this conversation with a blunt question. At the start of your book, you are writing about the late 1980s, and I quote, you say, "The city of Berlin had been divided for nearly 30 years, and the only sign of unity was the two zoo directors' dedication to cultivating their mutual aversion," which is a nice start. So that made me wonder whether you think that the competition between the two zoos in East Berlin and West Berlin was motivated and a reflection of Cold War tensions, or was it the other way around? Was it more a story of two personalities, the directors of the two zoos, who had their own private competition and feelings of jealousy and just used the Cold War to enhance this idea of struggle between them? What would you say?
Yeah, I think it was both. It was personal and it was a political proxy war. At the beginning, when I started writing the book and researching for the book, several people told me, oh no, there were no politics between them. It was only about animals. And after some time, and after I had spoken to other people, I found out that it was a very, very political proxy war. And it was the personal fight, because both zoo directors, Heinz-Georg Klöß in the western part and Heinrich Date in the east, didn't like each other. And so it was a very tough game.
Right, I understand. So can you say something about those political tensions? Where for instance, was the ideological struggle between communism and capitalism reflected in, say, the visitor guides, or maybe even the gift shops of the exhibitions, or of the zoos, I mean?
Yeah, I think in the Eastern Tierpark, it was more a symbol of socialism. And the zoo wasn't that symbol of capitalism. It was just, yeah, it was the biggest attraction of West Berlin, and was, yeah, a symbol for the free city of West Berlin. But in the eastern part, I think, for example, in the visitor guides, there were often mentioned the animals as a symbol for socialism, and the good Tierpark would also be a sign of success of socialism. And yeah, the problem of West Berlin Zoo was that West Berlin was an island in the Red Sea, and there were other zoos in West Germany which were also very, very important, like Frankfurt and Hamburg and Stuttgart. So Berlin had the problem to be an island, and the West Berlin Zoo had to try to get more important than other zoos in the West. And then there were the other problem, this other zoo on the other side.
I see. And if you say animals were a symbol of socialism in the East Berlin Tier Park, the animal park, what does that mean? How can animals be a symbol of socialism?
Yeah, many politicians, even in the western part, but also in the eastern part, brought animals as gifts to the Tier Park. For example, Ho Chi Minh gave an elephant to the Tier Park, which was called Costco, and yeah, at the beginning there was no area for Costco. There was no cage or something like that, and so Costco was, I think, 2 years old at that time. Was very quite a tiny elephant. Lived free in the Tier Park, and there are pictures of children running through the Tier Park behind this elephant. And it was, I think, this was best publicity for the new Tier Park, was a counter zoo to the Western Zoo, and to show we create a new way of zoo where everybody is free, and even animals feel free.
I see. Yeah, interesting. So when you talk a lot about personalities in your book, the personalities of the directors, and before we go or return to the competition between Date and Kleus, I wanted to mention Kleus's predecessor, Katarina Hang, who I think is a very interesting figure. And can you tell us a little bit about her life story and how she managed to keep her position as a woman in what you call a man's world?
Yeah, Katarina Hang is a very interesting person. She was the first zoo director in Germany. First of all, she was the wife of Oskar Heinroth, the very famous ornithologist, and he was the chief of the zoo aquarium. And until 1945, she was his assistant. She wrote his essays, and she helped him by researching and caring for animals. But I think in the spring of 1945, Oskar Heinroth got ill, and he died several days before the end of the war. And the Berlin Zoo director, Lutz Heck, who was a good friend of Göring, flew to Leipzig, and from there to Bavaria, because he was afraid of the Red Army. So there was nobody who could look after the zoo, but only Katarina Hang, and so she was the last person there, and she was the first to rebuild the destroyed zoo, who was destroyed during the air raids over Berlin in 1943, and then in the last days of the war in 1945. And right. Without her, I think there would be today no Berlin Zoo.
I see. Interesting. Yeah. Could you say that she was a kind of maybe even a feminist role model for people, because she had such a strong position and she maintained that position in spite of fierce attacks from her colleagues? Yeah.
I think it's difficult to answer this question, because I don't think that she saw herself as a feminist in the way we explain it today. She wasn't a modern feminist, but I think she did what she had to do, because the zoo and the aquarium, it was the legacy of her husband. And it was her duty, I think she thought like this, it was her duty to look after the zoo and to care for the animals. And so I think she didn't think about this problem, if she's a feminist or the only woman between men. But after some months and some years, she noticed that every man around the zoo tried to get her out, and that were very hard years for her. I think she was mobbed, and then in 1956 she was dismissed from the zoo, because then there were enough men who were not burdened with a Nazi history, and so she wasn't. She was dismissed.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. So in West Berlin, the zoo had to be rebuilt after the Second World War, but in East Berlin, it all had to start from scratch, starting in 1953. You described this process, but also the big difficulties the East Berlin Zoo had to very simply acquire building materials, and there was a lack of money, etc. So how did they, in the end, succeed in building parts of this zoo and obtaining the animals?
In the eastern part.
In the eastern part, right?
Okay. It was a problem, because there was a lack of raw materials and workers and builders, and so they asked the Berlin citizen to build the new zoo, and it was a program called Nationale Aufbauwerk, a building program in the eastern part, and after their normal work, citizens came to the Tierpark area, and they built houses and ways and all the things. And
as volunteers, or
as volunteers.
I see. Okay. Yeah.
It was volunteers, and so the zoo was built by the citizens in several months, about a year, and it was a very great success. And so it was also the people of Berlin, and especially of East Berlin, identified with this zoo very much, because they had built it up, and it was not a attraction that were suddenly there, but they built with their own hands.
I understand, yeah. And given the lack of money, how did they get their animals?
Date was a very important zoologist in Germany, and when the other zoos noticed that he's building a new Tierpark, several zoos in the east and in the west gave him animals as starting gifts, and for example, and several factories in the east spent animals. For example, there was a factory who built fridges. They bought him some polar bears, and even the Stasi spent some money. Secret Service spent money to buy some spectacle bears from South America, and I think the meaning was we always have an eye on you, and but there were
that's very dubious.
Yeah. And several politicians and salesmen spent animals, and even other cities like the city of Strausberg near Berlin sent ostriches, because Strausberg, the Strauss is the meaning of ostrich in Germany.
All right.
And so they always played with the names, and it was it was publicity during the 50s.
Right, that's very nice. Yeah. So if you would compare the two zoos in West and East Berlin, how would you say they relate in terms of size, number of species, but also maybe international acclaim?
The West Berlin Zoo is about I think 35 acres, and the Tierpark, when it was opened in 1955, it was, I think, even 3 times bigger.
Oh wow!
Today he is even bigger. I don't know if everybody can imagine how big, but it's related to the island of Helgoland. It's as big as Helgoland, and I think if we compare it to, it's much smaller than for example, San Diego Wild Animal Park or the Bronx Zoo in New York. But it's the biggest zoo in Europe.
Okay.
And the zoo in West Berlin was in relation was very small, but Kloes was very proud to say that he had the most species in his zoo in the whole world. And problem was when you go to the zoo, when you went to the zoo, you couldn't see every species, because several of them lived backstage behind the scenes, and nobody has ever seen them, only the zookeepers.
Right, I understand. Yeah. So I want to ask you something about Lothar Dietrich, who was the director of the Leipzig Zoo. He has a very special story, and you describe what happened in the vein of a spy novel called "War Spy Novel." Can you tell us what happened with him?
Yeah, the life of Lothar Dietrich seems to be a story of John le Carré or John Elway or something like that, because he was also a very famous zoologist in Leipzig, and there were big hopes that he would become the zoo director of Leipzig one day. But he had his special problems with socialism. He wasn't that into socialism as other zoo directors or zookeepers, and so he took the chance to go to West Berlin in 1961, I think in April. Several months just before the Berlin Wall was built.
Right.
And he flew with his family, and he had very much. He was very lucky, because the Secret Service tried to catch him, and just because the flight plan was changed some hours before he went to West Berlin. So the Secret Service came late, and he was just in the West. And some months or years later, several months I think later, he worked in a small zoo in Lower Saxony. And one day a man came to the area and said, "Yeah, this is I'm a policeman. Please come with me. We have to talk about something." And he said, "Oh no, I can't go away from here, because you have so many deers. I have to bring them to the cages, and it will last several hours until I'm finished. And okay, the other man said, okay, let's meet at the restaurant at 6 p.m. And when the other man was gone, he put the animals to the cages, which lasted only I think 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And he called the police, and they said, no, we have not sent anyone, but go to this meeting. There will be a special man, and they will protect you. And when he went there, nobody was waiting. So he thinks that this was another try to catch him and to bring him to back to the GDR, because the GDR had invested very much money and time into his education, and they want to be they want to get these people back to their country and punish them and put them into prison and not back into the zoo.
Which sounds very strange, because why would you go through all those troubles if you are not planning to make use of that investment and reinstate someone at the zoo? That was really an attempt to kidnap him and punish him as a kind of sign for the rest of the population. This is what happens if you leave our socialist country.
Yeah,
right?
I think, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Maybe after some time, they would have bring him back to the zoo, and he could maybe he could start a new career, but not as a zoo director, only perhaps as a lower zookeeper. Lothar Dietrich always was between the frontiers, and it's a very interesting life, and it's not
right.
Everything is in this book what happens to him.
No, I can imagine. Yeah. Speaking about Leipzig, we, in an earlier episode of Cold War Spaces, we talked about Leipzig as a center of counterculture in GDR times, and now there's this story about the Leipzig Zoo and political discontent. Why do you think was Leipzig a center of not necessarily dissidents, but maybe protest counterculture, etc.? Also thinking about the Monday demonstrations in 1989. Yeah. What made this city so special in this respect?
I think it's there are several reasons. For example, Leipzig was always was the city of the yearly fair trade. So every year, twice a year, people from all over the world came to Leipzig, and so it was a very open city. Next to Berlin. Berlin and Leipzig were the two world cities, I think, in the GDR. And so Leipzig was a very, open city. We can compare perhaps in a smaller way, maybe to San Francisco, because in the GDR it had a very lively LGBTQ scene. Which was very small at that time, and very they hid it in bars, and so it was not on the streets, but it was quite a relevant scene. And so Leipzig was a special town, and the zoo was a center of some Christians, several men in the higher part of the zoo, as the zoo director and his assistants. They were Christians, and so it was always, Leipzig wasn't that red zoo like other zoos. And I think Tierpark Berlin wasn't this socialist zoo as you could think, but because Data had to arrange with all these politicians, but under Data there were several people who could do yeah, what they wanted in the Tierpark, because Tierpark and zoo in general in GDR wasn't wasn't that important like the army or like sports, like Olympic sports, and so it was always a part where people who were some kind of underdogs also could hide.
I understand. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Clear. In a few minutes, we are moving to the Q&A. So if you have questions, please put them under the Q&A box where I will find them and read them. But before we go there, I want to ask you about the development of the two zoos after the fall of the Berlin Wall and reunified Germany. What happened to them? Were there discussions to merge them? Did the competition continue? We spoke a little bit before this program about the so-called wall in the head, the idea of cultural divide that survived the actual physical divide of the Cold War. So can you tell us a little about the zoos in the 1990s and beyond?
Yeah, after the Berlin Wall fell down, everybody in East and West Berlin was arguing, okay, do we need two zoos? And Data in the eastern part was already 80 years old and suffered from cancer and was very ill and weak, and he was afraid that the Tierpark could become a small animal park for deers and some chicken and something like that, and he was afraid that Kloes would take the best animals to the western part. And after some time, it was clear that both zoos will stay, but Data was now the problem, and he had to leave the Tierpark. Several weeks after his 80th birthday, he got a letter from the city, and they said during I think 2 weeks you have to leave your house on the Tierpark ground, and yeah, you can look for another house. And yeah, this old man was too. I think that was too hard for him, and yeah, several months later he died in the Tierpark, and he died on January the 6th, 1991. Which was the 65th birthday of his rival Heinz-Georg Kloes, and so it was like an omen or something like that. And after it, yeah, both zoos stayed, and but the Tierpark became something like a franchise of the zoo. And but today, if you ask people who is Heinrich Date, who is Heinz-Georg Kloes, in Eastern Germany, I think everybody who is older than 40 knows who is Heinrich Date. But in West Berlin, only very old people who are very into zoos know Heinz-Georg Kloes. So the legacy of Heinrich Date is much bigger than the legacy of Heinz-Georg Kloes.
I see. Interesting. Okay, thank you so much. And we are going to the Q&A now. There are already a few questions. First is from Eileen Salmas. Where did Katarina Hang get the funds to feed and care for the animals? And how many animals were lost in the air raids during the Second World War?
So it was very difficult to get food and something like that for the animals. For example, Berlin Citizen brought food to the zoo, like bread or some other things, and even the Red Army, when the war was finished, they came to the zoo and asked the elephant keeper to come with them, and his family thought, they will kill him. And after some time, he came back with several breads, and the Red Army just gave him bread to feed the elephants, or the one elephant which was left, because there were not many animals at the Berlin Zoo. After the war, I think it was 91 animals that survived. And
91 out of how many?
Out of, I think, several animals were brought to other zoos during the war. There were just, I think, around 1,000 animals, but 1,000 or a bit more animals. And of this number, there were just, after the war, just 91 were alive. And after the war, there were only very few animals who came back to the Berlin Zoo. For example, one giraffe and some fishes. So it was not a big zoo after it.
No, I see. Okay, thank you. Next question is from William Bruns, I don't know. While researching a book about the San Diego Zoo and Wild Animal Park in 1983, I visited Tier Park and interviewed the director. He talked about the strong relationship he enjoyed with the San Diego zoos and how it helped enrich his animal collection. Does this mutually beneficial relationship continue, especially in terms of propagating endangered species?
Yeah, I think there were very good relations between San Diego and Tier Park. When I first visited the Tier Park and bought a visitor's guide, there were several animals, like especially deers and goats from Central Asia. They were, and at the visitor's guide, I could read, this animal only lives in San Diego, Rotterdam, and Tier Park. And there were several species like that. And yeah, I asked, for example, Lothar Dietrich, and he said there was I think the connection to Jimmy Dolan. It was, I think, the zoo director of San Diego at that time. And I don't know how intense it was between them in the caring for animals, and but it was very they were very close together. And yeah, it's a long tradition between the zoos, and you can see it at the Tier Park today. Yeah.
Yeah, so that tradition continues and
until today. I think I don't know how much they work together, but because the people changed, and that would be interesting. Perhaps I will ask some people if there's still this relation.
Right. Okay. Thanks. Next question is from Donna Kent. What was the care of the animals really like? Were the animals just for display, or were attempts at conservation being made?
Ooh, this changed during the time. At the beginning, or until the 1960s, 1970s, it was just collecting animals and to look after them and to keep them alive, and perhaps to breed some animals. But it was in these days it was possible to hunt animals or to catch animals in the wild and bring them to a zoo, and this was a very vivid tradition. And after, I think, after the 1970s, when it was forbidden to take animals from the wild to the zoos, they had to care more for them, and several like rainforests fell down, and there was no more place in the wild for animals. Zoos became these places for rescuing endangered species. But I think it was at the end of 1960s, 1970s.
Right. But would you also say that at a certain point there was more attention being paid about the general welfare of the animals, as opposed to just showcasing them and making them an attraction for the human visitors?
Yeah, it was at the beginning. It was until today, it is very important to show animals to the people. Some people think zoos are there to rescue animals. This is one part, but the main part, even today, is to show people the animals and to show them how important it is to save these animals. But therefore, you have to show them, and to build this relation between people and animals is even the most even today the most important part. Right. And so yeah, you have to show animals and to have to show them so the people think, oh, what a beautiful animal. What happened to him in the wild? Oh, he's endangered. What a pity. And yeah, it's like this.
Yeah, but you also mention in your book that especially, I think since the 1990s, there's a stronger emphasis or also a stronger criticism directed towards zoos for not caring enough for the well-being of the animals. And did that actually impact the strategy of zoo directors and zookeepers to change maybe the conditions at their zoos?
Yeah, I think that it changes today. It changes the conditions in the time of Kloes and Date. There were no criticism. Sometimes people came to the zoo or to Tierpark and said, "Why should I pay 2 D-Mark for visiting the zoo? It's too expensive." But nobody cared how big the cages were, and yeah, today there are very many problems. For example, in the Tierpark, when they want to give some animals to other zoos and nobody wants to have these animals, yeah, they have to kill them, and even if these are some wild pigs, and the press will notice this, then there's this it's a great problem for the public relations and for the press service of the Tierpark, because I think Berlin citizens are a very special kind of people. They always think, oh, the animals live together and everything's fine, and yeah, some animals eat other animals, and sometimes there's not enough place for some animals, and it's a very ambivalent vision of animals.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from Marty Zisner. Is there any are there any remaining Nazi-era buildings still in use? And did the Red Army military government expropriate many zoo animals for their own purposes in the Soviet Union?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know if the Red Army took some animals to the Soviet Union. That would be interesting. But before, during National Socialism, several animals were brought from Poland and I think from the Ukraine to Berlin. And yeah, there are still some buildings. For example, the lions enclosure in the zoo was built for the Olympic Games 1936, and it was financed. The money came from Goering, and the lions are still living in this enclosure today since 1936, and in the eastern part, in the Tierpark, there is this area for the polar bears, very dark stone, and this is made of the ruins of I think of the Reichsbank, the biggest bank in Berlin under National Socialism. So there are some parts where you can see even today parts from the Nazi area. And if I can say this, there's one statue in the Tierpark. It's showing a deer. It's called Raufbold. It was one deer that was hunted by Goering, and it is still staying today in the standing in the Tierpark.
Oh, that's interesting. And there are no protests or
No protests. There's no
remove it?
information at this part but it's just staying there in the middle of the Tierpark, and nobody notices it.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. Next question is by Courtney Lamb. What were your research methods? For instance, archives, libraries, sources contacted, and is there a central repository of historical material for these zoos?
Yeah, I went to libraries and archives, but I thought the problem is if I only look into books and go to the archives, it would be a very maybe a bit boring book. So I wanted to talk to people who knew Date when he was alive, and so I asked several people like Lothar Dietrich, who was a student of Heinrich Date, and I talked to the sons of Heinrich Date and of Heinz-Georg Klöß. And at the beginning, they were very open to this, and after some time they became a bit afraid, and they didn't want to talk once more to me. And I don't know if they liked the book, because I think they were very open about the relation to their fathers. And for both sons, it was a very difficult relation, because they were not at number one for their parents. Both fathers, Klöß and Date, were they were as we call it animal people. They first of all they were into the zoos, and after this there was the family, and family had to wait until they finished their work in the zoo, which lasted until the early mornings. And
right.
And
so
so
the family, sorry, the family, they were the secondary animals.
or the third, or the
right. Okay.
So I talked to many people and tried to build a wide picture of this time and this era. And so there are several visions of this historic era, and so it was a bit difficult, but it was I wanted to show all these visions of these two men and these two zoos.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. Next question is by William Kuhl. He asks, at the end of the war, people were starving. Were any zoo animals taken for food?
Yeah, several animals just fade away. Nobody knows where they have gone. For example, some apes and pigs, and I think some deers maybe. Right at after the war has ended, there were several animals, because the cages were open and the wall around the zoo was destroyed. So every night there were some people who went there and took animals. And after some months, the zoo was nearly rebuilt, and there was a wall around the zoo, and so nobody could take animals. And some people even took wood from the zoo. They destroyed cages and took the wood because they wanted to make fire. And
right. Yeah. Okay, thanks. Then there is a question. You say animals have to be killed if they can't be sent to other zoos. Could they also be returned to the wild as an alternative?
Yes, some species return to the wild. For example, some eagles and some species of like wild horses, but that and some reptiles and like this. And but I think maybe about 50 or 100 species only. There are not much. There's not much place in the world for wild animals, so there is no place to where you can bring them to. And so it's zoos are always telling that they try to breed animals to bring them to the wild, back to the wild one day. But the bigger problem is that there is no wild anymore.
I see. Yeah. Yeah, it says a lot about what we humans are doing to this planet, I would say. Jan, I would like to thank you so much for this fascinating conversation. I learned a lot.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure for me, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Absolutely. So in 2 weeks from now, we have our next Cold War Spaces interview. My guest will be Rose Dosti, longtime staff writer and columnist for the LA Times, but also the founder and president of the Albanian Human Rights Project. And I will talk with her about the story of political prisoners in Cold War Albania. So hope to see you in 2 weeks. And thanks again. Bye-bye.